All right, to start our message, we're getting back into the Philippians study today. I read in 2012 about 3 tourists who were visiting the nation of Australia, and they actually wanted to see one of the islands that were just off the coast of that particular country. And so they had rented a car, and they understood there was a roadway that led them out to this particular island, and they had typed in the address to their GPS, and they started on their journey. Now, what they didn't understand was that the GPS was showing them a clear pathway to the island at low tide. And so they began to now journey down, and then they took this left onto a gravel road, and before you know it, they were stuck in some mud, and the tide was rising, and they couldn't back out, and so the water came and enveloped them, and there they were swimming in the ocean and had to be rescued. How about that right there? Okay, by the way, how many of you have ever been led astray by GPS before? You would like to admit that? Like, the restaurant should be right here. How is this possible, right? Okay, but I am thankful that we don't have to have the fold-out maps anymore. It's still better, right? Okay, now, this is going to be a metaphor for us, this experience, for a lot of times how people feel in life. They feel stuck. They feel like they're swimming in so much stuff that they didn't expect to show up in their life, and they're struggling to figure out this question: how did I end up here? Did I miss a turn somewhere in life? Should I have made a right where I made a left? Did I make a bad decision? Is this the way life is supposed to feel? I didn't think it would feel like this. Now, we have come to call moments like this crises. In fact, when I was growing up, the primary, in fact, I think the only crisis we anticipated in life was something we call the midlife crisis, which is right after you build your family, you get your career, and you end up like 35, 40, something like that, and you start to look back and you're like, you know, when I started this journey, I didn't think it would feel quite like it feels like. And so a lot of people make these life-altering decisions to leave whatever they built and try something new because they have this crisis moment in the middle of their life. But what we have now learned in our generation is we have way more crises than this. Do you know there's now something called the quarter life crisis? You don't actually have to wait until you're 40. You can have it early, right? So quarter life is right about 25, where you say, I just got my degree in my first job, and I'm not sure I like life like this. Maybe I should choose something different. And then you have crises like the end of career. So we live longer, and now what am I going to do with the rest of my life? They actually say that there are 8 different crises now that we go through in our journey. So good news. Welcome to 2023. You will live in perpetual crisis. Just every couple weeks you'll be asking, is this where I'm supposed to be? Did I make a wrong turn? How did I end up stuck here? Okay, now we're going to deal with that particular question because so many of us today are having these very questions. Did I make a wrong turn? Did I miss something in life? Where is it? Should it feel like this? Is this the way it's supposed to be? Are other people experiencing this? These kinds of crises are things that are very common. Now, the book of Philippians, we say one of its themes, sort of an undergirding theme to the entire book, is this question of soul health. Now, this is a term that we'll use today. Probably if I preached this sermon or this series a couple years ago, we'd just said joy or contentment. But this is what we're after, to feel like things are right on the inside. And I have soul health. And here's what the book of Philippians is. So it's a letter written by Paul, who was a church planting missionary, who had gone to Greece and planted a church in the city of Philippi, thus Philippians. And he's now in prison in Rome. He's in the last 2 years of his life, and he's writing back a letter to the church that he had planted. And so again, this was written, put in a scroll, carried by boat, walked to that place in Philippi where they would read it in their congregational meetings. And the book of Philippians has, lived through 2,000 years of history and been such an encouragement to so many of us. But Paul, as he is in this prison circumstance, unpacks for his people, for us as well, that he had a healthy soul. Actually, we're going to study in a couple weeks something he says in Philippians chapter 4, where he says, I have learned the secret of being content in every and any circumstance. Whether I'm well fed, I just went to the Cheesecake Factory and had a great meal, or whether I am completely hungry and haven't had a meal in a while, I know what it is to be content in my soul. And then he says this, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. He said, I'm centered I have something at the core of me that's satisfied. And he was writing in prison, in difficult circumstance, back to the Philippian church and saying, you need to get what I have, not my circumstances, but the content of my heart, which is something I want to impart to you. So we've been studying this particular book because it speaks to our situations. But in chapter 3, so we've now journeyed through the first 2 chapters of Philippians chapter 3, Paul describes a crisis of his own. Paul reaches one of these crisis moments in his life, and he's asking this question: everything I built, everything I've been investing in, for all the things I poured my life into, I'm not sure that was what I was thinking it would be. Okay, let's dive in now. Philippians chapter 3, and here's what he says. Verse 4. Though I myself have reasons, go to verse 4, guys, that's one, there we go, okay, there we go, awesome. Though I myself have reasons for such confidence, it says, if someone else thinks they have reasons to put confidence in the flesh, I have more, okay? Give background here. What Paul had built his life on was his religious performance. He had poured his life in to be at the top of his class. Of all the rabbis that were in the world, Paul was wanting to be at the top. He had performed religiously, and he had this belief that if I am religiously what I need to be as a religious Jew, I will keep the laws and I will follow the commands and I will lean into everything I'm supposed to lean into, and this will get me into a position where I feel close to God. If I'm closest to God through my religious practice, that will be everything for me, and I'll base my confidence on this religious approach to life. And he said, if anybody thought they were confident in their religious performance, the resume that they carried, I had way more than they did. And then he begins to brag on himself a little bit. And he describes himself. Let me just tell you, he says a little bit about my pedigree. He says, I built a resume like no one else's. I was circumcised on the 8th day, which all good Jewish boys were, so that they could carry the mark of the covenant between God and Israel. And I was part of the people of Israel, God's chosen people in covenant with God. And I'm from the tribe of Benjamin, which was one of the top tribes to be a part of, and a Hebrew of the Hebrews. And so he says, look, I had the right pedigree. I came from the right family. I was in the right schools. I did the right things. And so if you're looking for somebody who had a reason to have confidence in their religious performance, it was me. And then he goes on to say, in regard to the law, I was a Pharisee. Now, those of you who have been around church, you probably know about this group of people called the Pharisees. They were a religious group that was a group that we can really relate to. So what were the Pharisees? Okay, often the Pharisees kind of get a bad reputation because they're often debating with Jesus about things. But really, the root system of the Pharisees was really good. They believed in the Bible. They believed in the literal interpretation of the Old Testament. They wanted to obey the laws of God. That's a good thing. They believed in miracles. They believed that the stories of miracles of Elijah and Elisha and Moses all happened. They believed in heaven. Not all Jews in that day believed in an afterlife, but they believed in a resurrection in the future. So they had a lot of things theologically that we would probably line up with today. So he says, look, I was right pedigree from the right tribe in Israel. And I was a Pharisee. And as for Pharisees, I was at the top of my class. Like, for those who are religious and confident in their religious practice, I had it all going on. And then he says, as for zeal persecuting the church. Now, we'll circle back to that in a minute, because Paul, out of his zeal for his religion, actually went after anybody that he thought was undermining it. And for a while, he thought that Christians were doing so. And then he adds this at the end, as for righteousness based on the law. And how does he describe him? What's the word here? Faultless. Now, wow, Paul, my goodness. It kept the 10 commandments and all the other 618 commandments in the Old Testament. He said, I performed religiously to the T. I kept all the laws. I followed to the letter everything I was supposed to follow. Now, we understand Paul knew that this didn't mean he was righteous and innocent, because later on he writes to Timothy in another letter, of all the sinners that have ever existed in the world, he said, I'm the worst. Right? And so he's actually just painting the picture of the outward resume of his religious performance, not saying he recognized that he was damaged and in need of a savior. How many of you know you can be highly religious and really messed up? Anybody ever met like anybody? Okay, so Paul was basically saying this about himself. He was like, I had this whole resume that I built with my life, and then I realized that it didn't lead me where I thought it would. I performed at the top level, and here I am stuck in the mud with the tide coming in. feeling like I'm swimming and struggling to figure out, how did I end up here? Because look, this is what happens. We build our lives. We like, I spent my whole time building this family. I worked so hard on building this marriage. I built this career. I finally got this promotion. I finally got the house that I wanted. Look, this actually happens to pastors too. Like, I finally built my ministry and I got it to the place I wanted to be, or I became the pastor of this church. Wow. And then all of a sudden I realized it doesn't feel like I thought it would feel. And I feel stuck and I feel like I'm swimming and I'm wondering, what is the meaning of life? Because I thought this would have brought me to a place where I have this deep resonating contentment and satisfaction, and instead I feel stuck and struggling to figure out what to do next. This is where Paul was in Philippians chapter 3. He confesses to us that journey, and I hope you know there are a lot of us that are here today that are asking some of these very same questions, like, how did I end up here? And did I make the wrong turn? And should I have gone left when I was going right? And did I listen to the wrong advice? Did I choose the wrong career? Am I married? Okay, you know what I'm saying, right? So there's all kinds of questions that we have about how do we get here in life.